Hello, my name's Tom Carhill. It's the 24th of November 2013. I'm just going to save you all a bit of time in case you haven't read it. This pertains to ALPonz. It's one of an expanding repertoire of videos explaining how that Ponzi scheme has been put together. ALPonz being the Aston Lloyd Ponzi scheme, right? Lots of people involved. You've got police involved, you've got lots of lawyers involved, accountants, insolvency practitioners, all as crooked as you can believe, absolutely crooked. And I can prove it. And if you watch these videos, you'll eventually be on the same page as me. The best anyone can say in sort of contradiction of what I've said is they don't like to believe it. But they don't ever really give any better reason than that. So I think most people know it's true, and they know England's a very corrupt and crooked place to live, especially when you're dealing with the City of London police, the most bent police for the most bent policed area in the whole universe. Obviously, the City of London police, more crime goes on there than anywhere else. Right, so this crime report was, which did get a crime reference number, but it didn't have at the time when I authored it, was CR-5117-10. 10 pertains to 2010, so that's CR-5117-10. Right now, this was written, authored and dropped in maybe a couple of days after, or a day after, the 12th of August of 2010. Now, it was sent to Detective Sergeant Robertson. Right now, I went in and met Dobinson, right? So don't get them two mixed up. Sergeant Robertson and Dobinson. Dobinson was the first officer to sort of effectively deal with it. Now, I got two copies. I brought them down to Bishopsgate Police Station, which is in front of the fraud squad, because the fraud squad the fraud squad, you can't just go in and report a crime. You have to go down to like a fancy office. You've got a reception, and you've got this like man who just, basically, I think they're all coppers in there, but he's not a police. It's just this kind of way to remove any possibility of anybody giving any evidence. And that's quite clearly why it's like that. But if you drop stuff in with the civilian police workers at Bishopsgate Police Station, I handed in two copies, got her to stamp received on every single page. So all of the pages of my report, which pertains to evidence. Now, this was done in a rush, right? So, and I'm not going to apologise for that. It was done in a rush, so it's not perfect. But the content is good. And I also got to give credit to Greg Hallett, who wrote the author of the book New Zealand, a Blackmailer's Guide. Now, a lot of people say he's a bit of a controversial figure, is Greg, but when it comes to like corruption and this particular case here, I hadn't talked to him very much about it. He absolutely knew from start to finish exactly how the whole thing would pan out, and he said the only question is whether you get your money back or whether you do some effort, because nobody's obviously going to do it for you. Well, he didn't need to tell me that, but the point was that it's the fact that he said the police will be involved. He says that all insolvency practitioners will definitely be involved, and he said if they're not involved to start off with, they'll get involved. Like they'll be corrupted in the process. So they were involved. They did know the guys to start off with, the insolvency practitioners, Bijal Shah, Nimish Patel, and then you've got the even more dodgy Adam Stevens and Finbar O'Connell. Famously dodgy. I've had numerous phone calls about people telling me about other crimes that they've done. And under the guise of being insolvency practitioners. They're qualified accountants, by the way. Right now, so this was written on the 12th, the 8th, the 10th. Right now, just in case you need it, there was also a reference that I must have had beforehand, so I must have actually spoke to them on the phone about it before I handed this in. I think that's what it was. They asked me to put some stuff in writing, so I sort of did it and overdid it, if you like. I did a proper job. It's called FDL 4805-10. So I reckon that would have been my kind of incident reference, not the crime reference, but I've given you the crime reference. Dear Detective Sergeant Robertson, please acknowledge receipt by return email, and then later by stamped, signed, named and dated copy, which I can pick up upon your request. But of course I actually didn't. I handed it in to this woman, so I got it all straight away. Crime in progress by Aston Lloyd Holdings PLC, or Aston Lloyd AL in parentheses, so I'm going to call it that. That's the holding company. And Aston Lloyd and Partners International Limited in administration, which will be I was calling it AL and P Intel Limited. But anyway, subsidiaries Aston Lloyd and Partners, Aston Lloyd Research Limited, ALR, Aston Lloyd Holdings PLC, that's the same one again by accident, Aston Lloyd Holdings PLC again, TGP, that was one part, it's like a subsidiary, Agents, Coleman CTTS solicitor, Obelisk International agent, RE10, that's the bogus insult, de facto insolvency practitioners, Michael Lucas, PM for project manager, in inverted commas, because he's had no project, didn't do any project management, and he's got no experience. Joe Upchurch, MD, David Bussey, Billy Laser, James Rolat, Kevin Pryor, Christian Dallera, Carl Froch, Joe Calzaghe, as well as the administrators, which is RV10. But then they're sort of, and I've named them then, Bijal Shah and Imish Patel, they were the named administrators. In locations including, but not limited to, 3 London Wall Buildings, London, EC 2M 5PD, RE10 Arbor Mill House, 1 Arbor Mill Street, London, W1S 4HA, the city, 1 to 3 Union Street, Kingston upon Thames, KT1 1RP, the site in Bodrum and or Milas in Turkey and Marbella, Spain. This is because the site, there's 2, Bodrum is in Mulga, Milas has Ishpinir in it, Ispinir, that's how it's spelled, Ispinr. And I don't know if you know, but that property at Tuzla Lake's meant to be in Bodrum, but the properties weren't in Bodrum, so it says on the front of the contract it's in Bodrum and it's in Tuzla Lake. But it's not in Tuzla Lake. It's in it's in the province of Milas, and that's why it got registered at the Milas Land Registry. So for a start off, it's a complete fraud just on that one basis alone. Like the whole thing, considering all the money got swished around, you can prove that one thing, which proves itself because it's a fact. The whole thing is obviously a fraud. Police didn't like to hear that. They don't like to get that when they're trying to cover something up. They don't like it to be as clear as that. Anyway, point 1. Following a week of investigation, the 4th of the 11th to the 11th of August 2010, I have sufficient evidence to present to you for an immediate investigation into AL, their senior staff, shareholders, beneficiaries, solicitors, associate companies, consultants, and the recently appointed administrators in inverted commas, as well as other accomplices and complicit parties. Full stop. We are dealing with a gang who are involved in a fraud. Right now, this bit here is not technically accurate, but it was actually put in deliberately for that reason. It's not from any particular place. I think it might be a law in New Zealand, but you'll follow why it's important later. A gang is a group of 3 or more involved in 1 or more crimes where the sentence is 4 or more years. The membership can be roving. Right? Greg Hallett told me to put that in. The reason he told me to put that in is because he said, look, those cunts at the police force will jump on that and they'll start trying to make out every other single thing that you've said is nonsense because you've put that in. And let's fast forward a bit. Guess what Tony Dobinson kept going on about? He kept going on about that. Look, as a member of the public, I've got no obligation to define that I even know what the crime is, let alone the definition. If I think something's wrong, I'm allowed to tell the police about it. It's their job to look into it and decide what to charge somebody with. It's not for me to do it. So if you're ever dealing with the police and they start telling you that, criticising your definition of something or something, that's a very good telltale sign, nice and easy, right at the start, to show that they're crooked and they're trying to cover up for it. Because otherwise there's no need for them to point it out and make it... Well, they could point it out, but they wouldn't make a big thing of it. A proper way of dealing with it would be to say, oh, well, why have you put that? Oh, right, okay, well, that's not what it... I don't think that's what we apply in this country, or that's not how it works. Absolutely not how he dealt with it. He just started trying to make great play out of it. So, as I said, he fell for that little trap straight away. And, of course, then there'll be people saying, well, you shouldn't try and trap them. It's like, yes, you should, because they're criminals and they're trying to rip you off. So, of course, you should try and trap them. Right. Number 2, you inform me that only one complaint has been raised by another member of the public. Unfortunately, the definite impression left with me is that this party was unable to convince you of 3 things. These were the scale of the crimes in progress. 2, the evidence of crime which is freely and immediately available in written documentation, and that the administration process is part of the fraud. Critically, it was clear that your department had not considered that the administration, even if we forget that it is invalid and fraudulent, and I'll point out at this point that every time I put administration, I'll put in inverted commas. Sorry, even if we forget that it is invalid and fraudulent, is not in effect over the majority of the firms which constitute the group, and as such, your investigations into these firms would be unaffected by this factor, because of course when I first called them up, they're going, oh no, we can't do anything because it's complete bollocks. They're saying because there's an insolvency procedure, we can't criminally investigate it. Absolute lies. Right. Point 3. I am able to demonstrate that the situation is far from uninvestigatable, whether the administration procedure remains in operation or not, and that your failure to act immediately will allow a suspected large but unknown number of the British public to lose in excess of euros 70 million. Appendix 1. I've got appendixes at the end. I'll go through them at the end. It's a brag on their website, saying they've got 70 million worth of property in their sort of, in their collective group. You mentioned a policy requirement to alert Companies House or some similar organisation, mentioning their investigations department. I would like to note that immediate action is required, and that any formality that can be averted which otherwise might slow things or inadvertently warn various conspirators might prove a very unfortunate decision. Because they were trying to palm me off with some rubbish about that you have to go to Companies House. A complete load of rubbish. Companies House got no power or authority or anything to do with any of this stuff. It's complete rubbish. 5. As we discussed, you require a note to enable you to act, which they don't, but they lied and said they do. Are you getting a picture here? This is that note. This is not an exhaustive list of avenues which I believe worthy of merit, rather than sufficient input to trigger action. Fraud, by nature, hides behind the innocent, the careless, and the negligent. Only by action will more become clear. Then I've got a line. I'm in sort of second section. Point 1. The administrators are part of the fraud and members of the gang. The evidence of this is very clear. They have been investigating for 6 weeks. They are apparently bound to ethical and legal compliance, and I presume compliance with their professional indemnity insurance. It is with this in mind that the following fact ought to be seen, and I put ought, spelt it wrong. Why am I telling you? I don't know, it doesn't matter. The standard blurb at the end of all AL's emails states that AL owns the other companies, and that its liability is limited. In the last sentence of the first block of text, it clearly states that all of Aston Lloyd's international transactions are carried out through Aston Lloyd and Partners International Limited, Appendix 2. That's the thing that the administration was apparently dealing with. Right, so I'll read that quote again. Start of quote. All of Aston Lloyd's international transactions are carried out through Aston Lloyd and Partners International Limited. And I have to explain something. Before that in the blurb, it says that whenever they're talking about Aston Lloyd, just like that, that's Aston Lloyd and Holdings PLC. So they even have like a open and closed case in their own email blurb that they have to be shut down immediately, and it's worthy of, obviously, money laundering and fraud is going on. Police didn't like this. They become extremely panicked when they received this information because they just didn't know how they were going to get out of it. In other words, the accounts will be mixed up with each other. Failure of the administration process in recognising this on its own is impossible to reconcile with the actions of a contentious or diligent process. It is impossible involved. It is impossible to reconcile with negligence, ordinary or gross. Underlined in bold, this is complicity. The administrators are ignoring the big, very obvious picture and are limiting themselves to examining the single company in voluntary liquidation. Now, another thing they picked up on when I went to see them is they said it wasn't involuntary liquidation. The insolvency people would have put them in. They didn't. It was voluntary, and that's always been by their own admission. No secrets there. And to be fair to him, Tony Dobinson did get back to me, and he did actually phone me up as I left. And he said, sorry, I didn't realise they can actually do that. They can actually select their own liquidators. Sorry, not liquidators. It's not voluntary liquidation. That's a mistake. It was administration at this time. If innocent, this indicates subscription to a belief that AL and its apparent non-administration compromised subsidiaries who conduct all of their business, legitimate business and advertised abroad, with the exception of their UK head office overheads, etc., are able to operate as viable concerns without making any payments from any of these organisations. This indicates that they are acting without capacity, without mental capacity constituting legal standing, and as such have no standing or legitimacy in acting as administrator or administrators. AL are hiding information from me and other investors. I shouldn't have put that. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have said investors, should I? And might well be hiding some of their sub-factions' dealings from the wider gang. Obfuscation is a crime in this instance, but would not leave the administrators free from blame. How is it possible that two accountants have not realised that when AL contacted them to seek voluntary administration, offering only 2 of their subsidiaries up for the chop, that they actually would, by the nature of the stated process, clearly be required to look into the accounts of the other components as well as the parent company? As such, these would have to form part of the administration. More questions arise. The administrative accountants from RE10 should speak Turkish, be familiar with the Turkish building industry, and have some track record in that country. As AL have conducted their business there through TGP via ALPil, I'll call it, that's what it's become known as, ALPil, Aston Lloyd and Partners International. I'll call it that, but I didn't call it in the report. Via ALPil, who are in administration. TGP, a vehicle by which land to be held in trust, construction contracts, including supervision, project management, surveying and legal services are to be procured in Turkey. TGB should be their investigation. They should have all the money from all of the investors to date, and any loss should have flowed from then downwards, not back up the chain and back to ALPil. When, on the 5th of August 2010, upon being informed of the administration's process for the first time, I request a summary of the depth of their investigation and their qualification, citing Turkey and the land held in trust by TGP. They said they didn't know yet, as it was so complicated. How could a quantity surveyor or accountant's 4 weeks of investigation from such a ridiculous answer? I am a quantity surveyor, just to note that that's my line of work. Right? Complicity through inaction versus active promotion of fraud. That's a heading. Had the administration failed to understand the implications? Oh no, that's right. Have the administrators failed to understand the implications of not stopping this apparent upward flow of money from TGP via ALPil into either which has been created above them in the supply chain by AL? A simple check of TGP's records with contractors and suppliers' invoices should be able to find the conventional spend amount down to the penny, which is obviously all correct and very simple and easy to do, so that's why they haven't done it. Somehow, ALPil, who supposedly administered the Tuzla Lake Agreement contract for construction between AL and the general public, are aware that the very basic 8-page, 11-clause, double-spaced and very spaced-out document does not indicate that all of the money on Tuzla Lake job should have only been paid when performance of certain very simple interim steps were performed. How could all of the money have disappeared if the contractor hasn't been paid in full for their part of 75% income? What? Hasn't been paid in... Sorry. How could all of the money have disappeared if the contractor hasn't been paid in full for their part of the 75% incomplete site that they have paid to complete? The buildings still aren't finished, and they had been told not to start building on the properties constituting over half of the development. That's because I went out there, I spoke to the engineer on the site. Turns out, actually, which is a bit weird and it might confuse you, and it confused me and it shocked me, they had actually at this time, they'd actually basically finished the site. So They were so sure that the con was on that the guy couldn't even be bothered to leave the site. He was actually spending out his own money to finish it because he knew that he was going to buy it and sell it back to himself. So it's like, it's not even like a... He's just so sure that it was a con. This guy was called Tolga Kaisner, and he's a Turk. He sold the properties, the land in the first place, and he basically owned the building company. He put a charge on the land, then continued building. Why the fuck would you continue building if you're not getting paid? It wasn't like it was a really complex engineering firm doing really complex work where you have to do quite a lot of work before you get paid sometimes. This was just normal building work. So you just building domestic properties. If you're not getting paid and you've got, you just stop doing it. You wouldn't run up £1 million worth of money. It's absolute nonsense. But at the time, I didn't know about any of this. Clause 4 of the agreement clearly states that 30% of the bill cost is due on the 8th of September 2008. The fraud has been in effect from that time, as there was no building on my contracted plot from that time. In May 2009, there was not even any foundations for half of the development where my unit was meant to be, and the builder had been told not to start any, which at the time, you see, that makes logical sense that he wouldn't, but then it turns out he's put all this extra work in anyway. My payments had been spent elsewhere, as no work had been started, which is absolutely true. It's not. There's no ambiguity there. That's an absolute fact. I was there. I saw it. They were saying, well, that's where your one was going to be, but we've not done anything. Money has been transferred by stealth with the intent to permanently deprive through a blatant fraud. This has been done despite numerous written promises to the contrary on the 10th of August 2009 and the 5th of May 2010. The administration, as contracted by AL, is biased, as both are engaged in a conspiracy whereby AL is attempting to cut its losses by siphoning off its financing from one of its companies. The AL group is unviable and unviable in the non-criminal sense of the word. Therefore, the preservation of the subsidiaries or holding company is clearly a temporary measure to stifle intrigue and allow the money to flow out of the group and away from sight. Money laundering will certainly, in parentheses, sensibly from a criminal perspective, end of parentheses, be involved, and if so, in progress as I write. The administration is nothing more than a money laundering, fraud enabling vehicle in action. End of section. AL's fraud in one paragraph. They were contracted to manage a process which involved certification of value achieved on site. For a matter of years, they certified interim payments on work that was not there, was never there, and was never going to become realised, due to their instructing the builder not to start it. Discussions confirming dialogue were written as late as 10th of August 2009, when Joe Upchurch admits discussing completion of the site with the builder in his letter. From my professional experience, I can assure you that this is enough to prompt arrest and successful prosecution in the UK, wherever the certification is allegedly verifying progress. It is impossible to lose any substantial amount of money on this job according to the words of the English language contract, which was signed in England to be governed by English law. Under your jurisdiction, unless fraud is in operation, because it's under their jurisdiction because it's in the city, you see. And they're the City of London Police, right? Investors paid for title, in inverted commas, because it was not because that's what it said in the contract, and interest in a plot. This was all recorded as agreed and by memorandum of sale, by AL in the city who were charged with certifying payments as a precursor to them being made, which were attached to tangible real building components being complete. The money was not allowed to be put in a big gambling kitty, nor in an unknown foreign bank account. It was to be tied to actual progress on actual buildings on individual plots, which the clients had been provided with proof of title. Not title, but it's confirmed with English solicitors, Coleman CTTS of Old Trafford in Manchester and also Kingston, they said that that's what would happen, but they didn't do it because they're criminals. Gross negligence versus fraud. Negligence being the mirror opposite of diligence. Whilst potentially highly immoral, of course, it's not a matter for the police. I realise that, so please bear this in mind when reading on. I feel that a varied, planned, as well as ad hoc complex of excuses and hurdles will be increasingly evident, which will try to avert criminal prosecution for the guilty. Whilst I am certain that a policy of setting up lowly dupes to be civilly and potentially criminal liable is part of the plan, from what I have seen, it appears that faith in the veil of incorporation, which is a legal term to do with like basically firewalling companies as a veil of incorporation because they're separate corporations, but they're just being run as a big crime network. It's meaningless. So you don't have to pay. You don't let the if the criminals go and rob a bank, but they say they're working for their own firm. What does it mean? If they still rob the bank, it's still criminally liable. They still owe you. You know what I mean? They still won't give you the money back. You can't contract out of law. It appears that faith in the veil of incorporation is the main and remarkably successful obstacle, being consistent with the lack of a significant police investigation from the 8th of July 2010. That being said, evidence of crime is the focus of this report. They have, and these are bullet points, lied about the progress on the building to obtain money by fraud, certified work done and taken payments for that certified work when that work was not completed in approximately 50% of the cases. The work was not even started. Failed to produce photographs of the progress despite repeated requests, which can only be consistent with fraudulent intentions. Project management requires, for its own sake, taxation and for legal requirements. If they fail to produce records and photos, they are guilty of theft, as the customers have paid them to project manage and they have not done what they have been paid for. Fail to employ a qualified project manager or surveyor as stated in the agreement, so that is fraudulent, as this was part of the work being paid for. They failed to give certified interim payments of investors' money to the contractor, but certified this as being the case, which also amounts to sabotage. As though it was a fraud from the initiation, but definitely from the 8th of September 2008, when the first bill cost was taken, but the contractor was told not to start. End of bullet points. By reading the agreement and the other contractual documentation and receipts, it is clear that this matter was almost certainly in operation since inception. I have been on the site on 3 occasions, all at one visit, if you like, on 3 occasions during that trip over to Turkey. I've been to the site on 3 occasions, spanning the end of April to the start of May 2009. Have met the builders and their site engineer. I have been in practically complete apartments on the site, and following this have been assured title of one of these in apartment 48. They said you can have that one if your one hasn't been built. We can actually say that one's yours, which is a bit weird because it sort of goes around their contractual mechanism, doesn't it, really? But that's what they said when I phoned them up from England. James Rowlatt, I've got this in writing, and it's part of my evidence that I attached to this. Practical completion prompts legitimate organisation solicitors to enable handover of title, registration and issue habitation licences, etc. I was allocated a plot which was practically complete in May, which prompted a new final payment to activate this agreement to be made. It was not made. How come I, a quantity surveyor, will go to Turkey, see a piece of grass that should have my building on, then agree to pay the balance of the account? It is inconceivable. James Rowlatt admits his criminal liability in writing on the 18th of September 2009 in an email where he also names Michael Lucas, the apparent project manager. Appendix 3, that is. A series of false, impossible to achieve, misleading and fraudulent statements personally signed by AL's MD, Joseph E. Upchurch, are evident as follows. Joe signed a letter in his capacity as Managing Director of Aston Lloyd Holdings plc on the 10th of the 9th stating construction will not be completed in September 2009. as it had been anticipated. We are, however, now in a position where we can say with confidence that construction will be completed by January 2010. There is no evidence that he or WBC super middleweight boxing champion Carl Froch went to see the construction firsthand. This is quotation. There is no evidence that he or, and then this is quotations, WBC super middleweight boxing champion Carl Froch went, I'll put that in square brackets, to see the construction firsthand. Both Carl and I were extremely pleased. ... You can view the recent images at astonlloyd.co.uk gallery. ... Guarantee investors a fixed contractual cost for constructing 2 years in advance. March, this is in square brackets, March 2007 to March 2009. End of quotation. But that doesn't stop him from assigning civil liability to Carl or AL Holding Company, nor implicating them in fraud. Furthermore, the website cited upon examination is administrated by a different AL company, Aston Lloyd Research Limited, who, in quotations, assume no liability for anything they present in their terms and conditions. Don't appear to serve any purpose other than to present information. These T's and C's are confirmation of a long-standing intention to commit fraud. Needless to say, he's the MD here as well. And again, this implicates ALR, Aston Lloyd Research, as active participants in the fraud from the start. They have removed all of Aston Lloyd's building-related pictures recently as part of the crime which they are carrying out. They still claim that AL are managing 70 million which is on the first homepage. Joe attempted to blame the lack of progress as follows, in quotations, that many clients have not been able to fulfill their payment obligations, which it turns out is a load of lies. We've now later found out. I can swear, well, which obviously you would never have guessed, would you? I can swear to this not being the case, as 50% of the buildings were never started and 70% of the work to the site was to be completed in total from March 2007 to April 2009, and he told the contractor not to start them, nor the ancillary works, nor swimming pools ×2, as explained by the resident engineer of the contractor on site. Heading: not beginning half of the project's apartments was done at Aston Lloyd's request. I visited Turkey in April 2009 specifically to check upon my investment. Here I spoke to TTPC's resident engineer. Yeah, one second.